All right, good afternoon. Thank you ever so much for joining us today. I know I imagine it's been a very busy start to this half term, so we really appreciate you giving up your time. And I hope this is a very useful session to you. The focus for today's Teachmeet is looking at some resources that have been developed recently that will support students of classical civilization at both GCSE and A-level, and how they can be used to support independent learning both in and out of the classroom. The focus, what we'll have today, we've got a panel of teachers, we've got 4 teachers that are joining us today to talk through some different resources that they've been involved in the development of or use extensively in their classroom. We'd like to keep today's session quite informal. So after each person has spoken, there'll be an opportunity to ask any questions or to feedback on the resources that have been discussed. And there'll also be plenty of time at the end of today's, once all 4 speakers have delivered, to ask any other questions or to contribute any other resources that you think would be worth making everyone here aware of. So please do use the chat function as and when you like. We can answer those questions as they crop up, or as I say, there'll be opportunities to sort of unmute and sort of raise a question as we go through. This session is recorded, so I will circulate the recording over the next few days, along with links to the resources that are mentioned today as well. So I will just briefly introduce the panel before we get started. We have Francesca Grilli, who is, well, I'm just going to ask people to remain muted throughout if possible. There we go, I think we're sorted. Our 4 speakers today, we have Francesca Grilli, who is course leader for classics at Runshaw College. We have Alistair Thorley, who is teacher of classics at Stockport Grammar School. Adam Mason, who is joint subject lead at Simon Langton Girls' School. And we have Peter Swallow, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at Durham University. So without further ado, I am going to hand straight over to Francesca.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I've been volunteered to go first this evening. So it's lovely to be here, and hopefully this session will be useful for everybody. So it will be a second. I'll just make sure we're all looking at my screen before I start. Can it just be confirmed that we're looking at the PowerPoint? Can someone let me know?
Not yet.
Not looking at PowerPoint just yet.
Ah, okay. I just had a practice of this. No, I'm not sure why it's doing that. Hang on a second. So share screen 1. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, thank you very much for confirming. So I thought it was just interesting, before I start kind of sharing with you some video resources that I've put together and how I use them in my classroom, just to have a look here at why it is a good idea to use visual representation in students' learning. There was a really good paper which I've alluded to here about learning and the science of instruction, about how students learn more when verbal description is presented in audio form rather than in written text. And therefore that got me thinking about combining my revision resources with video format and making revision materials for them to use in their own time, pre and kind of post learning in the classroom with me. So that's kind of the theory behind it and why I decided to go about it. I thought it'd just be interesting to share with you how I actually produce the videos as well, in case any of you are inspired to have a go of producing any more resources, because there are always gaps in the classics market. There are many ways to do it. So, for example, I know people have used some, PowerPoint, for example, and voiceovers. I just particularly quite like Loom because as a resource, you can have a desktop version, and I just found it really accessible. And I just thought I'd very quickly just take a moment to show you. Hopefully you can also still see my screen. Do shout out if you can't. But this is the Loom website once you're logged in, which is very, very accessible because you can immediately see all of the videos you've created. And to be able to create a new one, it simply is as simple as clicking on this new video button here, record a video, and then it asks you whether, when you're making this video, it won't let me do it now actually because I'm sharing my screen, but whether you want to be on camera. Oh, there we go, it is working. So it'll say, do you want to record your screen and then have your camera as well with a little version of yourself? Or do you simply want to be a voiceover or you speaking? So it gives you loads and loads of functionality. And then, as I say, it gives you all of these kind of easy to see videos in one place, and then you can simply share them with your students from there. So that's how I go about creating those videos. And in terms of once I've created them, where I share them, and this is where I hope you'll be able to go in and to make use of these videos, is I created a YouTube channel. I don't know if it'll let me jump across. There we go. I created a YouTube channel, which is just on the handle @RunShawClassics. And I put my videos there into playlists. So hopefully they're easy for you to navigate. And if I just click on the playlist button, you'll be able to see which of these might be relevant to what you're teaching. So predominantly it covers Greek art, because this is what I was working on with the University of Warwick, trying to create a suite of revision resources for that particular A-level topic. But a lot of the Greek art syllabus at A-level is also relevant to GCSE as well. For example, the Bassi frieze. So, if you're teaching GCSE but not A-level, do go in and take a look, because there's lots of crossover. And it's organized by types of art, but also then by themes, where I've tried to pull together different pieces of art that are about the same topic. So looking across Athena in art, for example, or looking at Greeks and how they are depicted versus other nations. Amazons are in there, which of course is going to be relevant for Invention of the Barbarian as well. I also have covered Greek religion. So if you teach Greek religion at A-level, the prescribed sources like the anatomical votive for Tyche, the Helix by the Kodros painter are all in there as well. And then there are some more ad hoc versions as well. So for example, there is how to do the world of the hero comparative 10 marker, which anyone doing A-level classics would need to be able to attempt. How to tackle a Homeric simile. And the one that's new this year, if you've already seen my resources, is this playlist, RunShaw Classics Academy, where we invite guest speakers over the course of the year to speak to our students at lunchtime from a variety of different places, mostly academics from universities, but also sometimes we had, for example, the British School at Athens talking about opportunities for undergraduate students, employability skills. It was really, really broad. And we've made them accessible on YouTube so that you might want to share these with your students as well and give them further enrichment. In terms of how I envisage these resources being used within my own subject, well, I mentioned before kind of pre and post lessons. So you can do them as a way of obviously revising what they've already done and getting them to use them as revision materials. But what I found quite helpful is using them as flipped learning opportunities. So we're getting students to come to the classroom ready prepped, having already watched the video. And a really good website, if it'll just, I'm just trying to see if it'll let me click on this, because it's hidden underneath, sorry, it's hidden underneath what I'm on. So I'll just switch my website. Really good website. If you haven't used it, I'm sure you've heard of it, is Edpuzzle. Because what Edpuzzle helps you to do is to link to any video that's on YouTube. So it doesn't have to be one of my videos. It can be something, for example, that the University of Warwick have put on from their Teachers' Day. You can see I've used the Michael Scott one here on the Olympic Games. And what you do is you can insert questions into that video. So here's an example that I've done on the Siphonian Treasury frieze. And if I just click on it, you'll be able to see here at different points along the video, I've inserted questions. You can see them along the side here. I've done multiple choice because then they're self-marking questions. Equally, you can have open questions that your students can type into. But what is really good is if afterwards, once I've assigned it to a particular class, then I can actually see that my students have watched it. I can see their answers to the question, and I can also prevent them skipping ahead. So I love clicking that button so nobody can just zoom ahead and watch it at double speed. So it's just a really nice way of making sure your students are arriving at your classroom and they are ready to learn as well. Because it's not just about creating these resources, we also need to think about how they might be used in the classroom. So I've kept it quite short and sweet, just so there's opportunities as well to ask me any questions today. Thank you very much, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, Francesca. Any questions for Francesca about those videos? Steve.
Hi, Francesca. That's fantastic. It's really, really clear, and you put a huge amount of work into that. Is there any issue about copyright? I'm sorry to ask this horrible question, but when things go on YouTube, do you have, I mean, because there was a thing in the Italian newspapers last week, which was if you're an archaeologist and you found something, you can't publish it unless you got permission from the state. Now, I assume that doesn't go for anything that's all, do you basically get all your stuff that's already online? I don't mean to be awkward. I'm just
No, I don't think it's an awkward question at all, Stephen, because I saw that same article on Twitter, and it did get me thinking. What I can say is when I've been creating my resources, I usually search for photographs on Wikipedia that have the wiki commons to them. So you're allowed to share them. So that's what I tend to make sure I'm doing. So I'm hoping I'm covered by that. Obviously, I've made these resources before this new announcement. But I also was taking photos of my own. Anyone who knows me knows I like to travel around museums, take lots of photos. I think we will have to potentially revisit that article and try and understand exactly, therefore, as teachers, when we do have these resources of our own, what we can do with them. So I think it's worth adding to a debate for a meeting in the future. But certainly up to this point, I've been kind of conscious of trying to look for ones that I have the right to share.
Unless anyone else says, I guess one answer to it is that you're not doing this sort of commercial benefits, and therefore that maybe, yeah. I don't know. Anyway,
that's a very good point. Yes, exactly. I'm not selling these resources or making any money from them, so that is an argument, certainly. There's a question in the chat about someone has recommended Tweed to make questions for videos too. Have you any experience of it? I haven't, but if anybody has and wants to kind of put forward their experience in the chat, it would be very useful. I do know that Loom itself has updated recently to allow you to insert questions into your videos. So it might be that you can do it all in one place instead of having to create your video with Loom, put it on YouTube, and then use Edpuzzle. I know that's a bit of a roundabout way. So it's worth checking out Loom as well. There's some wonderful how-to videos on the website that you can watch as a tutorial first before you start creating. And thank you. It's lovely to see that some people are as well saying that they enjoy the videos and using them with their students. So thank you very much.
All right. Do we have any final questions or comments for Francesca before we move on to Alistair? If anything does crop up, please do pop it in the chat. We can always come back to it at a later point. But I will pass over to Alistair now. Thanks, Francesca.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So I'm going to try the share screen thing as well. Hopefully that'll all work. Can someone just give me a thumbs up that I'm not on mute and people can see my screen? That's great. So this was just some resources that are going to be on the CA's website. Based on the Mycenaean world topic. So just to introduce myself and to sort of say a little bit about why I did this. I've taught GCSE for a very, very long time. I've also run keynote courses on GCSE classics. So I've met lots and lots of teachers, maybe some of you that are in this sort of virtual room at the moment. And a familiar complaint that comes back is about the Mycenaean topic. People have complained about teaching it, felt slightly uncomfortable about teaching it. So it seemed a good one to sort of provide some resources for, hopefully, to give some support for people who are teaching this subject. One comment I had about it on a course was someone compared it to rusty spoons, that it was a topic built on looking at rusty spoons, which seemed a little bit unfair to the glories of the Mycenaean age, but nevertheless, that was the comment about it. So this isn't a rusty spoon in front of us, this is the lion hunt dagger, but it was just indicative of how people think about Mycenaean and about teaching it. So some of it might be unpopular, and obviously as teachers we've often got to teach things that we don't like Subarani textbook, but we have to kind of do it, and we have to make the most of doing it. but hopefully these resources are a way of trying to help people to kind of feel comfortable about teaching it. I think it was on an old spec. I hadn't taught it before this GCSE came about, and I taught it because I wanted to teach the Odyssey and therefore had to teach Mycenae along with it. But as classicists, we're used to making a virtue of necessity. And I love it now. I find that all the time I'm finding foundational aspects to the Mycenaean civilization that I refer back to further up the school, about religion, trade, art, the autonomy of the different polis before they were even really called polis, language. All of this is in that Mycenae topic. So it makes it a really, really interesting and really useful one. The other thing that struck me about it, one of the reasons I love teaching it, is the spirit of discovery that you get. When I went to Mycenae at Easter with my son, and we went off, you know, the bit that's at the bottom of the slope, and there were all these houses that have only been recently uncovered and then all overgrown again, and there was a tumble down staircase, and you really felt as if you were discovering it. And sometimes I feel that as a teacher, I get in the way of that, really, that I sort of tell the students how to discover the topics rather than letting them do it for themselves. And so that was a sort of principle of creating these resources, to actually create that spirit of discovery of the ancient world in the students themselves. So what I tried to do was I tried to use the experience of talking to teachers about teaching this topic, and then looking at all the past paper questions and seeing how is this examined. And I felt that the questions seemed to fall into two categories. One was, why is this object impressive? And the other one was, what does this object tell us about the Mycenaeans? And I found that my students frequently confused the two types of questions, and they ended up writing why it was impressive in a question that asked what it tells us, and in what it tells us they ended up talking about the wrong thing. So it ended up meaning that they were writing things that I didn't think they could get credit for. So what I tried to do with these resources, based on the mixed ability students I teach, was to try and very clearly, and hopefully this will advance, yes, to say straight away to the students, right, these are the two things you need to look at, the two ways you need to look at the dagger, why it's impressive, and what does it tell us, and to really kind of separate those two things out from the start. And this is one of the resources. Then I've made resources about each of the prescribed sources. Then they're not as, I feel slightly intimidated. It was me that volunteered Fran to go first, and now I'm obviously, you know, the hubris of that move is coming badly on me, because I've got no little video me in the corner and there are no little questions, and it would have been much cooler if they were on. So therefore that's my fault. But there are kind of two versions of them. You can either have my dulcet voiceover, or you can get rid of my dulcet voiceover. Obviously you can edit them, you can take the photographs out of it. Just in reflection of what Stephen was asking before, the pictures that I've used, like Fran was saying, I've either got them from Wiki Commons, or most of them are photographs that I took myself specifically for these resources, because it meant that I could then zoom in on particular bits. And I like my pictures better than ones that I found on the internet. And Fran's nodding, and she'll say the same, that when you go into a museum and you know exactly what you want a picture of, you end up getting a much better version, a much better idea of it. So anyway, back to the resources. So they're divided into those two sections, and then each of the sections then is further divided into 4 different areas. What I've tried to do with each of them is to give the students a framework, so that when they've watched the first one, they can do the same thing with the next source. So even if the source is unfamiliar, they can say straight away, right, what is it made out of? What's the material? What's the design? What's the execution? And then where was it found, and what was it used for? So those are the 4 things that I think keep coming up again and again on the sorts of questions that get asked. And I find that my students only ever want to talk about the design to start off with. They want to talk about what it shows. And I say, well, you can get lots of points for saying what it's made out of. You can get lots of points for saying how it's made. I noticed in the exam, the Homeric World exam that they did a few days ago, one of the questions was masters in metalwork. So there's lots and lots of references all the way through these resources of execution, how the metalwork was done, and why the Mycenaeans were so impressive at it. So that's what I've tried to do with structuring the videos. First of all, in the 2 directions, why it's impressive, what it shows, and then looking at these 4 aspects. So then on material, there's another big close-up picture, and it's got different ideas of what I think about the materials and what the students might be able to say about the materials. So I've used these resources in class, and I've used them as revision resources to try to get the pupils to guess what's coming up, to guess what the bullet points might be, or to add their own text to the pictures. So there's lots of different ways you can use them and edit them to make them fit whatever it is that you want to do with them. So in terms of also how to use it, I might have already said, I can't remember, but there's one with a voiceover, there's a version with a voiceover, and then there's a version without a voiceover. So you could put them on your virtual learning platforms that the pupils can then use as revision resources themselves, but they will be on the CA website at some point. So I like Francesca's phrase about pre-learning and post-learning, which I thought was a really nice way of putting it, that you can flip it, you can say, right, watch these resources and then come back and say, right, what do all of those sources tell us about metalwork or a different theme, etc. And then at the end, if I just scroll through, because I'm trying to be quick, there's a lot of clicking going on, but that gives you a very swift version of what it looks like, but I'm just trying to get right to the end. Oh, and I've gone past it. Whoops. Yeah, so I've put one slide that says, how would this source relate to these questions? So it brings it back to an exam focus at the end, and then where to go next. So how you would set that in context and what you would look at afterwards. So, and then the exam questions, the last thing that I wanted to say about it is that I haven't put them right up to date, because I'm aware that people might use last year's paper or the year before for mocks or for tests, etc. So obviously it can be edited as you see fit with your class, so they're not getting a sneak preview of a question that you want to ask them later. And then finally, I'm keen for any sort of feedback. Obviously they're not live yet, but any feedback on what I've created and how people might use them. But then also Rob and Joanne and Fran and Gronya have all had a look at this, and I've been really grateful for the discussions that we had about how they might be useful for students as well. So there have been a few other teachers just having a look at them first. So I'll now try and stop my share, stop share, and then I'll put myself back on mute. But thank you very much for listening, obviously at the end of a long teaching day. So that's great that so many people have attended. I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have if I can.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Alistair. And as Alistair said, they are currently being embedded into the CA website as we speak. So I will be, when I send out the recording to this, I'll also be sending the links to Alistair's and Francesca's resources as well. They'll be going live on the CA shortly. Do we have any questions, comments, feedback, anything you'd like to discuss with Alistair and the resources that he's very kindly been developing for the CA? We've got one question in the chat from Jane. These look incredibly useful. Are you using them more as flipped learning, and how do you structure a lesson after students have seen them?
So am I using them more as flipped learning? I've used them in different ways, because I've got different versions. I've got them as PowerPoints without the text, to see if the pupils can kind of anticipate what the text is that I'm using. And then how do you structure a lesson after the students have seen them? Well, then, I mean, it's useful to go back and see, you know, what have they picked up? Have they got the chief things? And then it's then relatively easy to do what I've done with other sources, to write up material, design, execution, position, and say, right, material, design, let's go through the source and let's deal with each of these aspects to it. But then also this idea that you can use, if they've looked at one and maybe they've revised it post the lesson that I've taught it, you can then look at another and then see, right, we'll take the same aspects that you've done, maybe another aspect of metalwork or a different fresco, an unseen source, and say, can you use the same techniques that you've seen on that video? Can you use them for this new source? So they're being given a structure of looking at ancient sources, which I then, because I teach the Homeric world first, it's quite handy then, because I teach the prescribed sources for certainly the visual, the material culture prescribed sources for I've just blanked on the topic for the myth and religion topic in the same way. So they've got the same structure there.
Alistair. Jane, I hope that's answered your question. Great. Do we have any other questions or comments? Feel free to unmute rather than use the chat if you'd rather. Perhaps not. All right. Thank you very much, Alistair. I'm going to pass over to Adam now, who's going to talk about some other resources from OCR.
Hi there, afternoon. I'm going to do the same, share my screen. PowerPoint. Be coming up there. Hope. All I can see is a black screen.
Got a bit of, well, I've got feedback. I don't know if anybody else has got feedback. You're sort of reverberating, Adam.
As well.
I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment and try and share the PowerPoint again. If you want to work mine looks
More from your mic. I don't know what's happened to your mic. That's.
I think I'm in a very big cavernous room, so it might perhaps be that.
So we can hear you twice. It's like it repeats.
Right, okay. I've got there then. Mute myself. Any better?
No, I don't think so.
No. Okay. I'm not sure what I've done there to make it all.
I wonder if what we could do is if I could ask Peter to present in the meantime, and then if you want to leave the call and then maybe rejoin it and see if that works.
I'll give that a go.
Okay, let's go with that.
Hello.
Hi, Peter. Thank you.
Let me just share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. It's not a PowerPoint, it's a website. So let's see how this works. Hi everyone, I'm Peter. I was until very recently a classics teacher and now working as a researcher at Durham. I'm going to start with a bit of an apology. I'm quite unwell at the moment, so if I come across as quite slow, forgive me. The wonderful thing about a Zoom meeting is that I can talk to you all today and then not have to worry about sharing my germs. So since 2017, I've worked with the Advocating Classics Education Project, a major AHRC funded project led by Dr. Arlene Holmes Henderson and Professor Edith Hall, dedicated to expanding the teaching of classical subjects in schools. It's focused principally on classical civilization and ancient history because they're the most logistically feasible subjects to introduce in lots of state schools and other kinds of schools. And in 2021, ACE was awarded follow-on funding to focus on building partnerships between museums and schools in collaboration with OCR. So we undertook an ambitious partnership with Liverpool World Museum to expand access to their classics for schools. We decided to work with Liverpool World Museum as a project partner because we're committed to expanding access to classics across the country, not just in areas where it's already strong. And it was a collaborative partnership, so we worked very closely with Dr. Chrissy Partheny, the Curator of Classical Antiquities at National Museums Liverpool, and also Dr. Gina Muscat, Honorary Research Fellow at the University of Liverpool, who contributed especially to our Greek art work. So our aim with this project was to create some completely flexible resources that could be used either as revision materials or in the classroom or for teaching beyond the curriculum as teachers and students needed. So we created 3 digital source books based around classical civilization modules, GCSE myth and religion, A-level Greek art, and A-level love and relationships. And as I say, they were designed very much to be flexible. So for example, for the myth and religion sourcebook, which you can hopefully all see on the screen now, we included a useful table summarizing the gods and goddesses students needed to know, with both their Greek and Roman names and their iconography. And we also included, if I scroll down to the bottom, summaries of Greek and Roman burial practices, so all thinking about things that are on the syllabus. Both of these were designed to support student-led revision or be useful resources in the classroom. But equally, none of the sources that we highlight in any of the source books are prescribed sources. Some are similar, so we've got this ash chest here, which many of you will recognize as being very similar to something on the myth and religion, but others offer a completely different perspective from the sources prescribed by OCR, though still very much with the intention that students can make use of them to answer questions in the exam. Students are encouraged to make use of additional sources beyond those prescribed by OCR, but colleagues have often told us how it can be difficult to identify relevant sources and find accurate and level appropriate information around them, especially on a busy teaching timetable with so many competing priorities. So our hope with these source books is that that will make the task slightly easier, as all of the information about the sources we've selected is there with the sources. So for example, lots of information about this particular source from Greek art. The other reason, of course, why we have chosen sources not on the syllabus is because of our partnership with Liverpool World Museum, and the sources from the Liverpool World Museum are not on the syllabuses. So it was slightly intended as a way of expanding beyond the curriculum, and slightly a necessity of the partnership that we undertook. So the source books contain a number of interactive elements, encouraging students to click on boxes for more information or to reveal answers. So for example, if I scroll down, they can test their knowledge of Greek vase firing in the Greek art source book. This works better, by the way, on Adobe. I'm just using the inbuilt Chrome PDF reader today because it's easier to show you, but it's better functionality if you open it in Adobe. But yeah, if a student wants to test their knowledge of the different stages of firing, they could decide what happens to a red clay vessel at the first stage of firing, click and see whether they were right or not. There are also inquiry questions, activities, and thinking points for students to take on independently, or which teachers can borrow for inspiration for their own classroom activity. So one I particularly like is this activity here, encouraging students to have a think about the contraposture position by standing in front of a mirror. Sorry. So working with the Liverpool World Museum presented some unique opportunities and drove the project in an interesting direction. So for example, for the love and relationship source book, there are no visual sources prescribed in the syllabus, though they can certainly be used to reinforce core content. And not many of the resources we chose can be used to highlight the syllabus's focus on heterosexual relationships, although we did select, for example, a bust of the Empress Livia and a grave monument, but they have lots of sources in their collection. For example, a fine bust of Antinous and a statue of him as well, which can be used to talk about same-sex relationships in the ancient world, which is also addressed on the syllabus. It also has a collection of hermaphroditus statues, which is not directly highlighted by the syllabus, but obviously could be made to be relevant, used to problematize some of the gender roles in Roman society. And there's also a passage from Ovid's Metamorphoses 4, which could be made relevant. And again, understanding Ovid's portrayal of gender is on the syllabus. This sourcebook in particular is more geared towards teaching beyond the curriculum, but with an idea of giving students additional ways of answering exam questions. And I will also just flag that it's Pride Month. So if any teachers are interested in using this as a resource while delivering an extracurricular session on LGBT+ identity in the ancient world, do take a look. For Greek art, the material offered by the collection obviously speaks to the sculptures and the pots, but not to architecture. Our intention for these source books was never to be exhaustive. They are intentionally short or relatively short, so that students and teachers can take out from them what is useful. And we were also able to include video elements, because, you know, as a former teacher, I know how helpful it is sometimes to break up a lesson just with a short video. So that's really helpful. And in our Greek art textbook, we've also got this wonderful replica of a Greek statue, which we worked with PhD student and digital illustrator Hardit Singer to design for us, which gives an artistic impression of what colour may have looked like on an ancient sculpture, which I know is something that students get very excited and interested by, but can be hard to sort of, you know, discuss in a classroom because we have very sort of uninspiring bits of evidence for it from the ancient world. So these source books are all available on our website, aceclassics.org.uk. You can just click on them here, download them, use them. As I say, we worked with Liverpool World Museum to make these, so there's no issues about images, and you can find more images of all of the artifacts we selected on the Liverpool World Museum website. Our website is being a little temperamental at the moment, so it does occasionally shut down, although it's being redesigned this summer. So if you can't access them for whatever reason, then just email me and I can send you copies over email, peter.swallow@durham.ac.uk. I'd really love to hear what you guys think about these, whether you think they'd be useful, if any of you have used them before. Part of the, you know, the point of making these was to make useful resources for teachers. It was also as a bit of sort of a proof of concept of what a good relationship between higher education, secondary schools, and the museum sector could look like. So if there's any feedback on that, I would very gratefully hear that. Thanks.
Thanks ever so much, Peter. Any questions, comments, feedback on that resource? Francesca.
Hiya, Peter. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really liked these resources. I'd funny enough, had looked through them very recently in the last couple of months again. One, because we're obviously based up in the Northwest, so it was great just to see one of our local museums reflected in the resources, and I wanted to show students that that was available to them as well. I thought it would be really useful to use as well as an introduction to students that might be coming to study classics in the future. I don't know if other colleges or schools do this, but especially us, we're just A-level sixth form. So we're trying to capture students earlier down that journey with sample classes. So year 10 come into us, year 9, year 11, all at different times of the year. And I was envisaging using some of those, you know, the myth and religion one as a really nice introduction to the Greek gods. I just had a quick question, if that was okay. So these are brilliant. I love the digital element of them and how interactive they are. We don't have the ability to give all students access to a device. So it was just a little kind of hiccup in my plan to use those digital resources with a class that were coming in of year 10 students. Is there a version, do you know, of a booklet that we can download that's not digital? Because I can't seem to print the digital version because it all goes a bit funny. So I just wondered if there was a version if you don't have access to devices, because the activities are superb.
Yeah, that is a really good question. The reason why they are digital is purely because of when they were made. They were made during the COVID pandemic. The need to make them digital then was important because it was a way of sort of getting access. I hear what you're saying. It is something we should look into, and surely wouldn't be very complicated to make a downloadable version. I would say that they can be set for homework, used for homework, and I love the idea as well of using them as introductions to these modules. That's great. And also just sort of they were designed to be flexible, so if you threw them up at the front of the classroom on the screen and got kids to engage with them that way, I would imagine they would also work. But that's a really good idea. Let me take that away and see if we can get downloadable versions, because you're right, the interactive elements are great, but it does mean that they can't be downloaded as easily.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Really appreciate the work you've done on those. Thank you.
Do you have any other questions or comments? No. All right. Okay. Thank you ever so much, Peter, and very well delivered, given that you're feeling so under the weather. Very coherent.
That's well, the antibiotics are working.
Adam, let's come back to you and see if your tech is working.
I hope so. Hopefully this is working better.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah, super, fantastic. Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to talk about the OCR exemplars, which I'm not sure if people are necessarily aware of on the OCR website. So if you are, bear with me for the first couple of minutes whilst I kind of talk through where to find them. Speak about very briefly some research to do with feedback, because that's actually had quite a big impact on how I've used the OCR exemplars recently. And then a few strategies that I've been using in the classroom. I won't profess to being an expert in it, so some ideas that I've been using, and feel free to put any in the chat and comment at the end of other ways that you've perhaps used them or you could envisage using them as well. I think it's quite pertinent as well to do it right now, because it's the last A-level Class Civ exam this afternoon as well. So I'm sure a lot of you have had your students coming out hopefully in a good mood after seeing their papers this afternoon. So in terms of where to find them, I guess the easiest place to look is on the OCR website. In the bottom corner, there's an assessment section. And then you'll see, when I checked the other day, it was only still the 2019 version of them for all of the different papers under the candidate exemplars. There isn't one, as far as I'm aware, for 2020 and 2021. I think because we've had the centre assessed grades and teacher assessed grades, and then there was a sort of a handful of students who would have sat that later on in the year in sort of October, November time. There are also 2022 candidate exemplars. So if you've got a login for Teach Cambridge, you can access them there. If you don't, your exams officer should be able to set you up with an account. And there's links to all of the A-level specifications and also the GCSE papers too. When you go through the papers, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but for the A-level text, it's the 10 and 20 and 30 mark questions for each of the units that are on there. They don't have the single mark questions. And for the GCSE papers, it's the larger tariff questions. So if you're doing myth and religion or women in the ancient world, it's the section C questions, so the 3 and 6 mark questions and the 15 at the end, and then the 8 mark use the source and your own knowledge style questions, but they don't have the short mark answer questions because most of them are either what they're right or they're wrong. You can also find some examiner reports via Interchange as well, so where you log in to get sort of exam results and stuff like that. Again, if you don't have an Interchange account, your exams officer should be able to sort you out with accessing them. So there's a couple of different ways you can access them. I think Teach Cambridge is probably the best way to do it because it's got everything there for 2022 and 2019. So just share really briefly, a little bit of research, as I said, it's had a bit of an impact on how I've delivered feedback and then how I've then used the OCR exemplars recently. Some of you will have seen Dylan William, and he's kind of prolific in the stuff that he's done in feedback. And this is something I've only stumbled across fairly recently, actually. This video, which will be shared on the PowerPoint and the resources that will be sent out, it's about 15 minutes long if you did want to go watch it in its entirety. But in this video, Dylan's talking about providing feedback that moves learning forward. and talks about various studies and research that's gone into it. But the thing that really struck me was quite a large study of, I think it was schools in Israel actually, where they looked at students receiving feedback, and there were 3 options of either them just getting a raw mark, a score out of 20, just a comment, and then feedback, which was a comment plus the mark as well. And typically that's the thing that I've done, which is feedback plus you've got 10 out of 10 or whatever it might be. And what I found really surprising is that the feedback that was just a score and then the feedback with a comment plus a score, there was very little difference in moving students forward in their learning. It kind of theorizing on why that might be, whether it be that students fixate on the mark and therefore if they've done well, they think, well, what do I need to do better next time? It doesn't really matter. I've got full marks. If they've done not so well, they see the score and then just ignore the feedback. I'm sure all of you have had experiences of giving an essay back where perhaps it hasn't gone quite so well, and yeah, the students down in the dumps about it. And the conclusion from the research is feedback with just a comment being significantly better for moving students forward. And that got me thinking about how I deliver feedback and how I use the OCR stuff, because I've always given a comment, you've done this well generally, and you need to do this to improve it better, plus, well, this is what you'd get if it was an examination. And I've started to rein that back in a little bit, and that kind of feeds into perhaps how I'd use the OCR exemplars too. Another very brief read, this is sort of 5 minutes or so if you wanted to read it, on a blog by Doug Lemov, and this is looking at sort of collectively worked examples, so creating a model answer, if you will. So even though we're looking at the end product, an exemplar answer, it's quite a nice article about looking at cognitive load and focusing in on a couple of things at a time rather than overwhelming the students. So it's quite a nice read. So uses in the classroom. How could you use a sample 10 marker, 20 marker, 30 marker from the OCR website? Now, I absolutely love color coding. I know some departments and schools have sort of a marking policy that dictates you have to use a certain color at certain times and stuff. We personally don't, but I know some schools do, so that might perhaps tie in with it. So if you've got your candidate answer, your exemplar answer up on the board, well, where have they used evidence? Could we pick out a colour? Where have they explained their ideas? Where have they linked to the question? Where have they used perhaps the dreaded secondary scholarship in the 30 markers? Where have they used literary devices, key terms, whatever it might be? And you've got that nice visual up on the board, or perhaps they're doing it on a printout in front of them as well. And it's a nice visual thing. So, well, look at the amount of yellow that you've got on there. Look how well this student's used evidence. Or, well, we haven't got much yellow on there. They haven't been quoting the passage in front of them, or they haven't been quite precise enough with their evidence. Editing and live marking. So that's where you've got it project up on the board and you kind of pick it apart and think, well, what could we do better in that? Maybe you might need to type it out perhaps, and you can edit it in real time. Well, pick out an individual phrasing that the candidates used. Well, I like the way that they're phrased that, but could they add in another example? What example could we use as a class to add it in there? And you kind of edit it and mark it in real time, if you will. Matching the comment to the response. This is something that I've done a lot more frequently, and that's based on the Dylan William video that I said about earlier. So all of the exemplars will come with an examiner comment on it. Usually it's about 3 or 4 sentences, 3 or 4 lines, and then it does have the mark. So when I give the students them initially, I tend to get rid of that completely. So there's various different software that you could use to remove things from PDF documents so that the students don't see it initially. I use a website, PDF Escape, where you can edit PDF documents and just kind of put a white block over it so they can't see it before you print it out. They might have a couple of essays or a couple of sample responses to the same question and a couple of the examiner comments about what they've done well and how it could be a little bit better, giving those out to the students. So, well, can you match up the response with the essay? So they start to read it and look at it in a bit more detail. I've done that quite a lot more with homework responses as well, given my response on feedback to the answer, and when they're in groups of 3 or 4, they have to read each other's ones and match up the response with it, and gets them picking it apart and analysing perhaps a little bit better. I often do get rid of the marks as well, because again, that's the first thing they do is, oh, this got 4 out of 10, this got 7 out of 10. And it's very rare through looking at the OCR exemplars that there's not that many full mark ones in there. There's a few, but there's not a huge amount. There's a lot of sort of level 4, level 5 responses on there too. I would add as well, when I looked at the OCR Hub responses to start off with, my first thing was, well, I don't agree with that. I'd give that blah, blah, blah out of 10 rather than the mark that's given on there. So yeah, you might not perhaps agree with it on there, but I think the feedback's perhaps the most important thing. I've picked on here just kind of what it looks like on here. I think this should be the one thing that everyone does if you do A-level, so the Aeneid bit of the world of the hero. So this is just an extract from one paragraph, from one candidate's answer. So this links in perhaps to the Duglamov article I was saying about, and kind of not overwhelming so the cognitive load of students and what they're focusing in on. Some of the answers are 30 markers, and some of the candidates have written 3-4 pages. So it can be a little bit daunting if you chuck a big fat essay, and especially 2 or 3 of them if you're comparing them. So just picking out a paragraph and saying, well, let's focus in on this one thing, this one aspect of it, and how have they structured it? Where have we got the evidence? And perhaps combine that with the color coding or the live marking as well, and focusing in on one specific thing. And that's the examiner comment that went with the whole answer rather than that specific paragraph, because I think this was let's just remind myself, I think this was a fairly good response actually in its entirety. Yeah, so I think this would have got 8 out of 10, a good level 4 response for that 10 mark style question. So yeah, I'll open it up to anyone else who've been using the OCR exemplars or any suggestions of how to use it. As I said, there's some strategies that I've been using with my GCSE and A-level students, but it's certainly not an exhaustive list, and I'm sure there's many other things that perhaps could be used that I haven't thought of or that you're doing in your classrooms. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Adam. Do we have any thoughts on using exemplars in the classroom? We've got one comment from Jodie. Not OCR exemplars, but ChatGPT is also good for this. Yeah, I think that seems to be something that is coming into classrooms more and more frequently now, and using it in a similar fashion. Thanks, Jodie. What else have we got here? Alex, you can find more exemplars covering every component if you download the exam feedback CPD materials from the relevant page on Teach Cambridge. Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. So there's plenty more available to use in your classroom rather than the ones that are just on that first website page. And James made a suggestion here. I have worked with levels, getting them to focus on what the examiners are looking for rather than precise marks. Yeah.
I would ignore the marks as much as possible. Obviously, they want to get 10 out of 10, but then there's that fixation with, well, this got 6, this got 7, rather than looking at the feedback itself and what they need to do to, well, create a cracking answer rather than, yeah, the fixation on the marks.
Any other comments or suggestions about using exemplars in the classroom? Alistair.
I find it quite a useful piece of advice to look back at the specimen assessment materials, because when they first produced the exams, the box that they gave the candidates to write their answer in was about the length that OCR expected them to write. And I think since then, because so many candidates wrote more, they ended up making the boxes bigger. So I think it's quite useful to go back and look at those first papers to get an idea of how long an 8 marker should be, I suppose, in the first instance.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I do exam marking, and this year so far, I haven't seen that many candidates using like extra pages and stuff. And I think perhaps because of what you've just said, they've got more space to write in the first place, so they don't need to go onto that extra paper. So yeah, it's a good guide, because I always have, well, how many paragraphs should I write, or how long should this answer be? And there's not really a definite answer. You can give them rough times, perhaps. So I would recommend you spend X amount of time on this particular question, but saying you have to write, yeah, a certain quantity is quite hard, especially when you've got the whole variety of, yeah, people typing and handwriting size and whatnot.
Any other questions or comments? It doesn't necessarily have to be about exemplars. We can open this up to any of the speakers, or actually just any questions you might have about classical civilization more broadly. We have got a little bit of time if there's anything you'd like to raise at this point. If not, I mean, we can absolutely wrap this meeting up before 5:30. But if you are just having a think about any questions or comments you'd like to add, the CA is currently thinking about our CPD provision for the next academic year. This year, we've been running these after-school teach meets, and it's been brilliant to see so many of you pitching up every time. So thank you for supporting us with those events. But we are looking at shifting the way that we run our CPD next year and potentially moving to online CPD days or sort of longer sessions rather than after-school teach meets. But to help us shape those events, it would be really useful to get some feedback from you. So if you wouldn't mind, I've got a very short survey. There's only 7 questions, and I'll just pop the link in the chat now. So if you are able to just spend a minute or two answering. Oh no, sorry, I've just sent that just to Adam. I meant to send that to everyone. Answering those questions, that would be really helpful to us. And if, like I said, if there are any other questions that you'd like to ask the speakers, then please do pop them in the chat as well. One question here from Bonnie. In terms of individual lessons, are there any ideas how to lessen the dry content front loading? I'm finding it really tricky to deliver all the content for GCSE without it becoming monotonous. I guess we can open that to the floor. Anybody have any suggestions there for Bonnie?
I guess it's whichever, depending on what unit and what topic you do, and your schemes work up. I try and mix it up with women in the ancient world, which will be covering year 10. So I do the Greek section and the Roman section, and Greek section and the Roman section in the various different topics. So starting with women of legend, so to get that mixture of Greek and Roman, and then at the end of each topic do the comparison, like a mini conclusion sort of thing, and that's worked fairly well. Then we do Roman city life for our second unit, and we do the culture element first, do all of the culture, and then do the literature as the second section. I did trial using the literature as and when it turned up in a relevant place to culture, but I didn't particularly like it. It didn't really work for us so well, and it seems to work fairly well, I think.
Thanks, Adam. And another suggestion here from Jodie, doing a lot of flipped learning. So they do the reading and at home, and then you get to do the interesting bits in class. Great. So I guess there's less of the delivery of the potentially less interesting bits from the front of the classroom. Thank you. Lovely. Bonnie, I'd be happy if Adam is happy for me to. I'll be happy to put the two of you in touch if there's an opportunity for some resource sharing there. Any final comments, questions, thoughts before we close today? I'd like to say an enormous thank you to Francesca, Alistair, Adam and Peter for delivering this afternoon. I know it is a very busy half term, and so I really appreciate you giving up your time to support this event, and I hope the rest of you have found it really useful. It would be great if you could fill out that feedback form so that we can make sure that we're tailoring next year's CPD offerings and make them as useful to you as possible. I think, oh, sorry, one question here about the Homeric World units. Alistair, this might be one for you. Students find the Mycenaean side dull and confusing with it being different to myth and religion, but the literature looks more complicated for the other options. Has anyone taught multiple units and have experience of whether the other literature units are trickier? Anyone taught across the GCSE specification?
I suppose I would advise, like I said before, to stick with my senior. I think it can come across. I've experimented with different ways of learning it using those resources, but also that I've tried to really focus on the spirit of discovery and to sort of take these sources in isolation and to try and make it exciting that way, right? You've just dug this up. What does this tell you? What do you like about it? And to try to kind of, win them over with that, because I do think, the other literature, about students that I've taught have always said that the Odyssey is their favorite thing that they do in classics. So it's kind of, that's what initially made me persevere with my senior, but now I do really like it, and I think they do too. They certainly seem to be kind of positive about it, because it does have that capacity. And that's why I said at the start, the sort of rusty spoons throwaway comment, that it can sort of kind of die a death. But hopefully some of those resources I've made might help. But I think that it can be, the content in it can be reduced as well. I think that's a useful thing to see. Someone was saying about the dry content. I think sometimes it's worth looking at each of the sources and think, well, exactly what do they need to know from this, rather than trying to tell them everything about everything, I suppose.
Great. Thanks, Alistair. Okay, so we are able to finish this afternoon session early, which I'm sure you'll all be thrilled about, and you can get out into the sun, or at least get back on with whatever work you have left to do. Thank you once again to our panel of speakers today. Thank you to you all for attending. I will send out the recording to this, plus all the links to the resources that we've discussed, in a follow-up email this week. If there's anything else that the CA can do to support you and your schools, please do not hesitate to contact me. But I hope you'll have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for organising.